Hi there guys, my name's Conor and I am a wildlife artist that specialises in both graphite and scratchboard. So welcome into the third part of this fur masterclass where we're looking at how to create this tiger's muzzle. So in this section we're going to be focusing more on how to create this actual muzzle texture itself, and we're also going to start discussing how to create those whiskers. So I hope you guys enjoy this one and let's get started. Right then guys, so like I said a minute ago, what we're going to do is we're going to start working on this side of the muzzle. So there's going to be a lot of different textures that we're going to work on here when we sort of compare it to this upper part of the tiger's bridge of the nose. So the contrast here is going to be a little bit more stark. We're going to have the brightest area in the piece just here, and we're also going to have some of the darkest. So the contrast level between the two in this one area is going to be quite high. Now what we also have to work out in this area is there's going to be whiskers coming over. Now that's going to be a little bit more complicated and we're going to have to work out how we're going to do that, and I'm going to show you a couple of techniques that I use. So the first point of call is just really picking a place to start. So I think for me, what I'm going to do, now you can start really anywhere. You could start down this side or you could start sort of from the nose itself. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the nose itself and sort of just get a feel of this piece, because I haven't worked on it for a couple of days now. So I just want to get that feel back into it of what we're doing. So we've got this sort of dark area down here and we're just going to try and start mapping out some of this fur texture. So luckily when we did our line art phase, we managed to include all of these fur directional marks, and they're, like I say, just going to help to be our map. And again, we're just looking at our reference photo, just getting a slight feel for this and where we're going to go with it. And I've got those two reference photos up as well. So I've got my initial main reference photo, which is going to act as my main almost tonal map. And then I've got my second reference photo, which is my line art, which is superimposed over my reference photo. So you can see that the darkness here sort of brings down into this fur. So that's something that I just want to take my time with. And I'm only going to work on this small area for now. Now obviously when we're using this indenting technique, it is a little bit harder to see where those marks are. I have positioned a light just up here. I may have to adjust it as we go so that you can see the marks that we're making. I don't think I've gone quite high enough with those first strokes, so that's why we always start off light and in a small area. So I'm just going to bring them up a little bit. We've almost got a bit of a line, if you can see on the reference photo, where there's a very small band of fur that's a little bit darker before it goes into this bright white stage. And that's what I'm looking to add in now. And what this is going to do is it's just going to help blend that area from the edge of the nose into this area of white fur. And don't worry if you think this area has gone a bit light. we'll come back in, like I say, at the end and readjust all those values. So we're just following this fur direction round. And like I said in the first video, or the first two videos, well no, the second video, sorry if I can get that right, when we were doing the bridge of the nose, fur direction is a key thing that we need to really try and pay attention to. And it's probably one of the things I think when I see people's work who are maybe beginners or are struggling with realism, a lot of the time it's because their fur direction isn't as accurate as it could be. So I'll see these areas where the fur's just coming straight out from the side or straight down, and realistically, when you really have a good look at this fur, there's so many different fur changes. So it comes down here, so you've got some areas that are coming flat, and then it curves around and it almost then ends up horizontal. And this is what's really going to give form to this tiger, or this tiger's nose. But if you were doing a bigger piece, really everywhere, so the eyes, the cheeks, the ears, is all just going to add form and shape to this tiger, or to whatever animal you're doing really. And it's something that I think we often overlook. And again, the tools that we're using for this one, like I've done before, I will link them down in the description below. And I don't really think the tools or the pencils are hugely important at this stage. I think even if you were using, as long as you're using a good grade of pencil, I think it's absolutely fine. You don't have to be using the Caran d'Ache pencils that I'm using. If you want to use Faber-Castell, if you want to use Derwent, you know, they're all gonna perform equally as well. I think at this stage we're just I'm trying to teach you the techniques rather than the subtleties of why I use the pencils that I use. So the ones that I'm using, like I say, are these Caran d'Ache ones, but the key thing with the pencils that you're using is you want to keep the end relatively blunt. Now this is probably a little bit sharper than what I would normally use, and you can see how I've got one edge that's a bit flatter and then one edge that's a bit sharper. Now you'll see me rotate my pencil as well as we go through, and that's just so that I can try and get an even wearing out of this pencil, because I do normally like to keep them nice and blunt. This one's a little bit sharper, like I said, than I'd normally have it, only because it went too blunt and I needed it to get into a smaller area. I can't remember if it was on this piece, but I ended up having to sharpen it slightly, and it's just gone a little bit too sharp, which is okay because it will eventually blunt down a little bit. And I do keep some of my pencils quite sharp, so you'll see me using the Staedtler pencil, my Staedtler pencils that are in the clutch holder, so this one, and I try and keep them a bit sharper, as you can see, and that's because I like to use them to really get into the, if I need to, let's say, darken an area and I need to actually fill in some of these first strokes, I'll use it to do that. And there are sometimes times when you'll need a sharper pencil, so, and I don't want to keep having to sharpen these Caran d'Ache ones and then blunt them back down again. It's not really a quick thing to do. So like now in this area, I'll use a slightly sharper pencil. Now this isn't too sharp, and what I'm trying to do is just fill in the tips of these indented marks, because that's just going to give almost like a shadow effect coming out of this area. So again, with our line arts, we've done a couple of things. You'll see a B here, and there was a W there. I think you can just about see it. And then there's a couple of other Bs. Now for an area like this, things can get quite confusing very quickly. And that's in regards to where you are on your artwork. So I like to do that just so I don't get lost. Because the last thing I want to do, even if let's say you go over an area with a bit of graphite, it's always really hard to get that area back to the whitest white of the paper. And I sometimes feel like even when I do erase it, it's just not quite the same level of brightness. So I don't really want to put unnecessary graphite down in an area if I can help it. So I really don't want to put a black stripe down in the wrong area. So that's why I put the B's there, just so that I know that's going to be a black stripe or a black area, and the W means that's going to be a white area. And I also use that when I'm doing a complex area. So if I was doing, let's say, elephant wrinkles, I sometimes number them. So you'll see me put a 1, 2, 3, or even like an ABC type of thing. And that's just so that when I look at my reference photo, I know I can relate to where I am on the piece. So even when we're doing these white areas, so there's an area now that we're working on just here, and this is a fairly bright area of white. Now even this, if you have a look at the reference photo, you can see those black lines indicating the shadows underneath. So we still need to try and get those in, but we're just not going to fill them in too much. We're going to be really light, and we're going to space our marks out. Now this is a B pencil, and I may come back in and I may do a bit of a darker tone, but I think for now I'll just use a B and see where we get. And I don't want to put too much in that area, so I'm just going to leave it like that, because the other areas around it will also help add the impression of fur in that area. So I'm going to come up and across and start working on this white stripe area over here on this muzzle. So I'm still looking at where those whiskers are. Now we've got a whisker coming down over this area, but generally the whiskers start a little bit below this. So I'm going to use my indenting tool and I'm going to flick out over into this black area, and I'll work around the edge of this sort of area first, and I may start at opposite ends like this and just sort of work towards where we want to be. and I'll try and clump some strokes together. So if you, I think it's being picked up on camera, so let's look at here. So I won't follow necessarily, like I say, the reference photo exactly, but I will pull an area over and then join another first stroke to it and just make a bigger clump. But I won't do that for everyone because I want this to look quite natural. I don't want it to look fake or too structured. So I'll also then go back over and add a few more strokes in. Remember to change that angle. As we come around to this edge, it's almost horizontal. Now that I've got that sort of first row in, just there as you can see, we're going to need to start working back into it with the black, and that's just going to help outline this area. But I'm only going to do just the tips because you can see the whiskers are going to start coming out over there, so I don't want to fill this area in too much. And I'm also just going to extend it up slightly. And all my first strokes are sort of crossing over each other. You can see that none of them are really parallel to each other. And I find I do this, it just helps give a little bit more interest to this sort of area. So I'll get my B pencil and I'm just going to lightly just add in on the edge of this. Because like I said, I don't want to get lost. I want to know where I am and just create that map. And then the same goes for the top. We're just going to work our way down from the top. Then again, we're just going to get our 2B pencil that I've put down, and I'm just going to bring this area down a little bit, just so again I don't get lost and I know where I am. Now I'm probably going to do all of the white strokes first, or the white fur first, before I start doing these black stripes. Because what I like to do is get those whiskers in as well. So you can see how much area I've actually filled in with these indenting marks. So again, you don't, in an area like this, you don't want to leave too many gaps because it is quite a dense area of fur. And then again, I'm just going to just outline very gently this edge. And I want to make sure I don't come too far down, because as you can see, the whiskers are sort of coming out of this area. I'm just trying to look at where this whisker's coming out from here, because I might just try and get that in now. So it looks like it's just about here, and it comes over and ends up down here. Now what I've done is, so on my indenting tool, that's the side that I use for most of the fur, and then I've got a slightly thicker side, and I tend to use this for the whiskers because the whiskers are a thicker strand of fur. Now I like to get this base layer of fur in first and then pull this over the top, because if I pull this over the top first, I then feel like I'm trying to work my way around that whisker. So all we'll do is do that. And you can see it's indented over the top of the fur texture. So now we know where that's going to be. We can start just filling in a little bit of this lighter fur texture. Now as we come back towards this area, it is a lot brighter, so we do just need to remember that. And it's a bit of a feel really, whether you want to go with your B pencil and have a bit more freedom with how hard you press, or whether you want to go with your 2B and just be really, really light. I'm not going to put too much into this area just yet, because like I say, it's I want to get the rest of it in and then I'll work back in. But what I will do is just finish off this area here. Now this is the area that's meant to be the bright white. Now I didn't put a mark in where this white fur almost transitions into this slightly less bright fur, if that makes sense. But I can see it's, if I look at the tip of where this black stripe is, it's roughly in line with that, and then it just comes and swoops around. So I'm just going to put a few little marks in there just to help remind me that that's what happens, and I'll smooth that out in a moment. Right then, so next thing is we're going to start working on this stripe down here. And what I'm probably going to do is start working a little bit more on this, and then I'll come back, now that you've seen sort of how I would do this sort of area, I'll come back to you when I'm putting a little bit more detail in there. Right then guys, so I think we've got to the point where I can do maybe as much as possible without now having to get these whiskers in. So obviously I need to sort of start with this darkness, and in order to sort of finish off the actual white part and be able to work out my tones properly, I need these dark parts in. So it's time for the whiskers. Now these can be quite stressful at times to put in, because they are a little bit more of a difficult thing to do. So I'm going to start with some of the smaller ones, and then I'm going to work my way up to these bigger ones. So one of the smaller ones that I can see actually is probably about fur size, and it just pulls out over into that area. So they're quite easy to put in. It's these sort of more prominent ones, and we have to try and get the location roughly right. So there's one that's just on the entrance of here, and it's only a small one, and it comes just over into this black area. So I try and look at where it starts, where it finishes, and the general then shape. So I know it's going to do this. And I have to just try and be confident with these marks. If you're sort of slow and too deliberate, it will sometimes go a bit jagged, and it won't be a smooth straight line or a smooth curve. So when you get to the end as well, you need to remember to lift off and have that tapered stroke, just like that. Now there's another one just down here, it goes like that, and we almost want to try and get most of them in, but they can be a little bit confusing to see at times. And you have to almost as well try and work out which ones are overlapping others. So this one's quite a long one, so it goes from about here and then it comes down to here. Now I might just pause there and just show you what happens when we then start just to shade over these. You can see how, because our pencil's blunt, it doesn't go down into those whiskers. So you've got this one just here. And we will sort of go in and redefine these and make them sort of stand out a little bit more. And if you find that some graphite does go in, just get your kneadable eraser, just make a really thin edge, and you can just go over and it will just pick out the graphite. The reason I'm using a pencil for this is you could use graphite powder, but the problem with that is because the graphite powder is a powder, it will likely go into the indenting marks that you've put down for your whiskers. We're still on this general mapping out phase. We're not really putting too much detail in just yet. We're just working out where those tones are going to be. So you can see just how we've got some of these whiskers starting to appear. Now I reckon I'm going to get the rest of these whiskers in, even though they're going to overlap onto this area down here, because this area down here is not going to be too much of a focus area. I want most of the ideas to sort of the vision to be just on this muzzle itself. So these areas just down to the side, they're just going to be a bit softer. So I'm happy to try and work around the whiskers in that stage. So the next one, so we're going to count down, so that's the top layer, or the top area first, so we've got another 2 in there, and then we're coming down to the second one, and just next to the end of this whisker, there's one that comes out and goes down. But underneath that, there's another 2 whiskers down here that's sitting underneath it. So one's about here, and one's just above it. And then this one that's sat just up here is going to overlap these 2. And that's just the process we're going to follow as we go around and put all these whiskers in. So again, that's probably about there just for now. It's just enough for us to carry on working up here. So I don't want to overwhelm things. Obviously we've still got these whiskers up this side. So even in these black areas, or these areas of darker fur, I'm not just scribbling in a random direction, I'm still following that natural path of this fur, because these black areas, even though they don't look like they've got any detail in, they are still fur. So they're still going to have that fur growth and that fur direction. So I just want to make sure I still get that in. So you'll see me just still following that. So now that we've got them in, and I think you can see them quite clearly on the photo, on my drawing, I'm now just going to start redefining some of this area, because I need to just try and get this shape right, and then also sort out these lights and darks, get my tones a little bit more accurate. But now that I've got those whiskers in, I can do this a little bit more confidently. Now, like I say, I will be going back in and re-establishing the look of those whiskers. They're not really complete yet, but I just want to get this in first and get this area done. So looking at my reference, I think I need to put a little bit more detail or bring up the fur in this area a little bit. We'll just take some of that darkness back out. So this is my 4B, so I'm just going to start working on some of these darker tones. Now this end, I ended up having to sharpen this, so again it's a bit too sharp for what I want, but we'll make it work. And the way I do that is I just start on the areas where I could do with a little bit more of a sharp pencil. So areas like this just coming out from the muzzle, from the nose, sorry. And then we're just going to redarken this area underneath. And just by adding in that tonal variety, you can already see it's just got a little bit more interest to it. That's why I always like to, or that's why I always suggest you're not going to get these things done with just one layer. You need that variation of tone just to give it some life. So I think what I'll do is I'll speed this area up, because this sort of slow building up of this tone is going to take a little bit of time now. And then what I'll do is I'll come back to you when we're adding a little bit more detail. Right then, so we're almost at the sort of upper part of this muzzle now. So you saw me creating and sort of building up the darkness here. Now you may have seen me using a slightly different pencil. So I was using this in some of the darker areas. Now this is from Staedtler. It's one of their Mars Lumograph black pencils. And it works really well at getting those really deep dark blacks without that graphite shine as well. So when I want an area to become really dark, or have a bit of I'm struggling to get the darkest tone that I want in an area, I'll tend to use that. And you can see it made a little bit of a difference down here. Now I will go over all of this like I always say at the end, and sort of redarken everything up. And there's still a few whiskers we need to get in that we need to make sure we don't forget about. But that's generally how I've got those ones in there. Now they do need tidying up a bit, so they're not, again, complete. You can probably sense a theme here that nothing's ever really fully complete. Not until the end. Now this area up here is very much similar to how really we've done throughout this whole piece. So there's nothing really new in this section. We're just sort of slowly building up that fur texture, just making sure we're planning where things are going and the direction. And we're just joining it up to this area that we completed in part 2. And this is a really great study, I think, for anyone that's sort of new to fur and graphite or wanted to practice this technique, because there's a lot of fur to do. And it's good size as well. It allows you to get a good amount of detail without it taking weeks to complete. Now, like I say, this white area down here, we haven't put a lot of detail in there yet, just because it's given the impression of fur just by everything that's surrounding it, really. So sometimes just by leaving some bits out, it can help. We don't have to sort of fill in every area. I have put some very, very light marks down. I'm just not sure if they're being picked up necessarily on camera just yet. So back to our 2B pencil. Out of all of them, we probably use our 2B the most, just because it's so versatile. It's really good for most sort of light layers, mid-tones. And you can get so much different tonal value just by altering how much pressure you're putting in onto the page with this. Do just make sure that when you're putting in these first strokes with the pencil, you're not just shading over everything. We're trying to create sort of mini clumps of fur, and also areas that have a little bit less, probably darkness, I'd say, to them. And whenever we're doing like one of these stripes or these dark areas, and you can see throughout the piece, we always overlap into them with our indenting tool. And then it's important to have a look into those black stripes. I mean, there's not too many on this piece itself, but these black stripes are actually fur themselves. So a lot of the time, depending on how the light's catching a piece like this, these black stripes will a lot of the time have some fur texture in them. So do just make sure to pay attention to that. You can see here already, just by, this is the same pencil, so just by adding a little bit more pressure, you can see how the darkness and the tones are varied. Hard just to bend my arm around to get into this position. I think if you're doing it at home or you're following along, don't be afraid to just move your paper around and just alter the position of it. I'm trying to keep it in the same position so it's easier to watch for you guys, and it's not as, it doesn't make you feel sick when we keep moving the paper. But if I was doing this without recording it, in this area especially, I'd probably try moving the paper. Don't feel like you have to keep it in the exact same position. And again, even in these little tiny black areas, we're just going to add that crossing over bits of fur. just need to make sure, so you can see on this black stripe that's sort of coming up around here, there's just a little bit of fur that's probably just catching the light. And again, it's just trying to pay close attention to those details, just because that's going to help with the realism. And we'll come back in and darken that stripe like we did with the others as well. What I really like about this technique is it's almost invisible when you're actually putting in those fur strokes. You don't know what it's going to look like, and then when you add that layer of graphite over the top, it's almost like a surprise to see what you get. So it's a bit something that I like about it. It can also be extremely stressful because you don't know what you're going to get, but it's really cool just to see how everything actually develops when you start putting that darkness over the top of it. Almost seeing it come to life, really. So I'm not going quite across into this area, so this is still the black stripe, but we've got some whiskers that are coming out of there, so I don't want to go into there just yet, because I think in order to get those whiskers right, I am probably going to have to rotate this this piece. So I'm going to start using this Mars Lumograph. Now this is the 8B. I'd normally start building it up with the 4Bs and then the 6Bs when I'm doing this, but I am just aware that because there's not a lot of tooth to this paper, because I wanted to keep some areas really smooth, I don't want to fill up all of that tooth with the lighter layers. I want these areas are going to be quite dark, so I do want them to be dark, so I'm starting to put them in. So I'm just going straight in with this sort of 8B. So it's making some steady progress on this. as you add more details in, as I've said on the previous pieces, something else will look like it needs adjusting then. So the darker we go with certain areas, all of a sudden then the areas we thought were dark need darkening further. So it's a constant sort of adjust, readjust type of thing that you'll be doing. And like I say, I want to try and keep this area nice and white, but I do just need a little bit more fur texture in there. Just the lightest part. Right then, so I think just for this final part, I'm going to just rotate my piece just so that I can start working on this area a little bit better. Right then, that's a little bit better, so I can actually sort of work better at this angle now, just because what I need to do is get these whiskers in. So obviously we've worked on these ones that are coming up to about there, but then there's going to be a few more coming out. So again, we're just looking at a reference photo and just adding these in. There's a collection of them just here. I probably won't get all of those ones in, just because there is quite a lot, so I don't want it to look too full. And then just these sort of 3 or 4. And the good thing is try and cross some of them over, just because that gives a more natural look. Okay, I think it's probably enough there. We've already filled up this area. So just working around these ones. So the fur textures that we're going to be doing, they're same as excuse me, what we've been doing throughout the whole piece really. So we've just laid in those base layers. I'm probably actually just going to bring this down slightly, just because at this angle I can't see if I've definitely got some fur strokes in that area, so just so I'm sure. It's hard to tell sort of what's going on just underneath these whiskers. It's almost like the black areas of this muzzle are just going to come up and sort of sweep round. There's a little bit of fur texture underneath that we'll capture, but apart from that, it's just adding in these final little details for this section. And then we're going to go back in and just redarken this area with this Mars Lumograph. Now, just because it's quite a small area, I'm just going to go back over these whisker strands, just so that I can try and see where they are. just want to take out some of this dark area again, just because what I want to do is pull this white stripe on this muzzle sort of up and over here. I feel like that darkness was just giving it a bit of an odd shape, so I'm just going to add in this area, and hopefully this will just help with that shape. And it sort of fades out as we get up here, so I don't want it to be too stark, but I felt like with nothing it just looked a little bit unusual. So just trying to get in between these whiskers now, just to try and darken up this area. And I also just need to re-establish these whiskers, because now that we're going over that area, they're just picking up a little bit of graphite. If you're struggling to get into these, you can always trim down an electric eraser as well, and that will just help you if you're struggling to pick out that graphite. You can really get into some small spaces. I normally find that the my Kneadable eraser can do most of it. I just want to soften the ends of these whiskers as well. I don't want them to be so bright. Right then, so just having a final look at my reference photo, just to see where else needs touching up, if anywhere. So obviously down here we just still need to work up from this outside edge, but I think that's just going to be part maybe of the next video. Turn this back around so you guys can see it. Okay, so we've made a good start on that muzzle now. Obviously there's still a long way to go. So what I'm gonna do is, obviously this video has been quite long already, so I'm probably not going to film doing the rest of this area of the muzzle, and what I will do is I will rejoin you when it's time just to tackle this final little bit of area down at the bottom.